Item 1 on the agenda is questions to consider any questions from members of the public or members of the council. I don't believe there are any questions from members of the public. Are there any questions from members of the council? No, thank you very much. Item 2, we have to receive any apologies for absence. Councillor Murdo is at home because he has COVID, so we welcome him on the screen, and Councillor Headley sent his apologies in. Are there any other apologies? Item 3 is minutes of the previous meeting. To confirm the minutes of the meeting of the Executive held on the 24th of September 2022. Are they agreed as a true record?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. Item 4, disclosure of local and/or disclosure of pecuniary interests. Members are reminded that where they have a local and/or disclosure of pecuniary interests in any business of the council to be considered at this meeting, they must disclose the existence and nature of that interest at the commencement of that consideration, or when the interests become apparent in accordance with the council's code of conduct. Do any members have such interests? Councillor Atkins.
Thank you. I'm declaring a local interest in item number 8, which is the fees and charges, proposed fees and charges, because my son is the manager of a care home within the borough.
Thank you very much. If there are no other declarations of interest, item 5 is references from Council or Overview Scrutiny Committee. Mr. Austin, are there any?
No, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much. We then move on to item 6, the Wootton and Stewart 3 to 2 tier conversion. Councillor Valentine.
Thank you very much. I'd just like to say a few words by way of introduction to the report that you've got in front of you. As you know, the majority of Bedford Borough schools changed from a 3-tier system to 2-tier between 2015 and 2019. But the Wootton and Stewart cluster of schools chose to remain in a 3-tier structure because of the cross-border relationship with Central Bedfordshire. The report proposes a non-statutory consultation about how these schools can also change to a 2-tier structure. A linked consultation is taking place in Central Bedfordshire in relation to the Cranfield area, which is close to Wootton. Many children attending lower and middle schools in Cranfield progress to Wootton Academy. Some Bedford Borough children attend lower and middle schools in Central Bedfordshire. By working together across local authorities and schools, we hope to support the creation of a consistent 2-tier system across both local authority areas. The reason for the change to 2-tier is the same as what it was when the Bedford Borough change took place. That's to say, the original 3-tier model of lower, middle and upper schools was created before the national curriculum came into being, and because of this, it doesn't correspond to the key stages against which assessment takes place. Since the vast majority of local authorities are now 2-tier, teacher training and school inspection is also oriented towards this system, and where middle schools still exist, it can be difficult to recruit staff. And the change to 2-tier reduces the number of school transitions that children make, which has been shown to hinder progress as they have to settle into a new school environment. The report details the schools that will be affected and the phasing of the change, which will, if agreed, take place from September 2025 onwards. The process of change will also involve 2 academy trusts: Chiltern Academy Trust, the trust to which Marston Vale Middle School belongs, and Wootton Academy Trust, to which Wootton Academy belongs. If the report can be agreed this evening, then a 6-week pre-statutory consultation will start on October the 31st, which will provide parents and carers, governors, staff and community members the chance to input on the proposal via an online consultation portal or in writing. It's very important in a change of this kind to keep all stakeholders on board, and I've attended many of the meetings with head teachers and governors concerned, as well as visiting the 2 existing Bedford Borough lower schools. A letter has gone out to all parents and carers in the Bedford Borough schools affected, advising them of the outline proposals and that a report would come to this executive. A similar letter went out from Central Beds Council to the Central Beds schools involved. A lot of work has gone into this report. Changing school structures is complex, in the first place, but especially so when they're taking place across two local authorities and when academy trusts as well as maintained schools are involved. This work has involved school place planning, planning the phasing of the changes across year groups, and planning for the necessary finance to make the changes possible. I would like to thank all the borough officers involved in getting us to this point. Also to Central Beds officers for their cooperation and to my counterpart in Central Beds for her support. I would in particular like to thank the head teachers and governors of all the schools concerned who have shown patience and commitment throughout this process, together with the leaders of the two academy trusts. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions or any comments? Councillor Vann.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to add a few comments, both as a teacher myself, in fact, but also as former education portfolio holder who was in place when we went through the transition from 3-tier to 2-tier across the rest of the borough, if you like. And I'd like to just, well, agree with the comments made by Councillor Valentine. I think these things can only be done if people agree a way forward together and if there is that collaborative working. And whilst back in 2015 there may not have been the appetite for that sort of structural change to be delivered then in this cluster, there is now that appetite clearly, and it's great that the schools have been working together on that sort of forward direction of travel. All the reasons obviously are set out in the report, but the other thing I just wanted to comment on is that obviously any time of structural change in education could be concerning. You know, you could look at it and want to be more aware of what's going to happen. So I think actually this report is really helpful, both in terms of the table that's set out later on with the sort of colour coding of what journey a child will make through the system depending on what year they're in now. I think that kind of visual representation of the journey each child will make is really important and really valuable. So I'd like to just particularly highlight that, but also to highlight when the consultation comes forward, clearly the number of children in need of being educated is not changing, or if anything it's increasing, and therefore in terms of sort of the need for staff and the need for support staff and everyone and the whole school communities to work together to support the education of those children and young people, I think that's worth bearing in mind, and it's really promising and positive, I think, that schools have agreed to work together as well to find people's spaces within the system and to focus on recruitment, obviously, of excellent teachers, but also retention of staff and maintaining that across the board. So I'm just going to agree, Councillor Valentine said that it's absolutely critical that you have all stakeholders on board. I think it is, and at the end of the first paragraph of the executive summary, I think that's the most important one, that this consultation, which is non-statutory, as you say, seeks the views, including those of children and young people, parents, school staff, and the whole school communities. That means everybody, in summary. Thanks.
Any further comments? The recommendations are set out in 2 on page 18 of your pack. Are they agreed? Agreed. Thank you very much. Then move on to the item 7, the Corporate Plan 2017-2022 final year outturn for 2021-2022. As the report says, the outturn of green and ambers was slightly lower than previous years, and this is probably to be recognised, or it is to be recognised as sort of with the pandemic and the ongoing legacy of the pandemic and the impact of finances that continues to impact services, make it very difficult to maintain those levels. Also in the report, though, is a 5-year summary to look at the plan across its whole period of time and how we performed across the whole set of key performance indicators. If you look at those, it's interesting to see, you can sort of see where the hits from pandemics come in. I think obvious things like attendance at leisure facilities. There's periods where we clearly didn't do well because they're all closed. But there are some really interesting facts, and I'm just going to pick out a handful of them to see sort of the kind of stuff we did and sort of to highlight what the council does. So in the year, out of 409 assessments, that we actually did 376, or just over 90%, were done within the 28 days following the assessment. The care package were actually put in place. which obviously is a key thing for people. I know we'd love to do it as quickly as you can because that's important to people as they go back to home often. The other one that I think is people often forget in our extremely busy environmental health team who did a lot during COVID, but they're sort of bread and butter, no pun intended here, of their day is actually doing our environmental food hygiene ratings. And out of 1,531 inspections they found 1,510 to be broadly compliant. That's 3, 4 or 5. And that's really good in terms of the standard of our restaurants and food outlets, but also a huge amount of work for the staff. I know that Councillor Royden would always like our roads to be as good as snooker tables, and we try to do the best we can, but the weather always tries to fight against us. But out of just over 2003 potholes we fixed, 1,886 were actually permanent fixes first time, almost 95%. And obviously it's important that we try to get those right first time, not just for residents, for cyclists, for drivers, but also if we can get it right first time, it does tend to save money. When businesses say you need to run the council more like a business, there are many cases where we do have to run it more like a business. But there are also things that a business would die for. There are a large number of our customers that have no choice but to buy from us. Council taxpayers and business rate payers can't choose to go somewhere else in terms of paying their business rates. But because of that, our cash flow is really positive. And we made a key target of paying our invoices, because we're cash flow rich, of actually making sure we pay our invoices within 30 days. And in fact, out of just over 22,000, 97.6% were paid within 30 days. And it's one of the key things we look at, because we can do that, and if we get money back into the economy, that's really important. The final one you're going to highlight is the carbon CO2 emissions. So the year 21-22, we were 6,999 tonnes. And the first time we baselined it was 2012-2013, we were 16,500 tonnes. So we've gone from 16,000 to 7,000. There's still a long way to go, and we've got lots of plans. We're waiting for sometimes technology catch up, particularly in the transport fleet, which is obviously difficult with some of our bigger vehicles. But those are just some highlights, and there's a whole load of things within the report that shows the kind of work we do and hitting targets. I mentioned at the start of this that the financial pressures, this will make the 2022-23 targets incredibly difficult, and we'll see some of that in the next item, but the pressure on councils around the country continues and is speeding up as the pressure continues with a whole range of things, with fuel, with inflation pressures, cost of living that affect everybody, including businesses, voluntary communications, and of course the council. The recommendations are set out in 2, and I move them from the chair. Are there any questions? Are there any comments? Are the recommendations agreed? Agreed. Thank you very much. Item 8 is fees and charges. I'm going to start off with something that you may notice that the report, if you go down to item 7, is from 2 officers, one of which is Andy Watkins, the Assistant Chief Executive Finance. This is the last report we'll have in a council meeting of an executive or full councillor from Andy. He is retiring from that post, though continuing the pensions post with the council. And I know I saw him on screen, I hope he's still on screen, but just like to do publicly to thank him for all the work he's done for this council. I do feel it's been a really tough time as Assistant Chief Executive for Finance, but I do feel he's getting out when things are getting exceptionally tough to do how we do that. But for all the work and how he set us up to be where we are, I'm sure we'd all want to thank him for the work he's done. So thank you very much, Andy. This report is the fees and charges that we set. We have tried to wherever possible, keep them as low as possible. So fees that are directly to residents, we have frozen. For all types of business and organisations, it's 10%. We'd love to do lower than that. We're unable to. So social care fees, we should be looking at full cost recovery, and we've actually capped the increases. They would be much higher if we hadn't done this. They are still 12.5% higher than we want them to be, but we thought we couldn't take the whole increase to make them full cost recovery in one step. And then we continue to freeze the charges for parking fees to try and help our businesses in the town centre. The reports are before you. I'm happy to try and answer questions if I may, if I can. I move the report and the recommendations as set out in 2. Are there any questions? Are there any comments? Councillor Jackson.
Yeah, it's just a brief comment. When I read this report, I had concerns that we were raising fees at all, although I do understand why we have to do it, and that we are doing our best to keep them as low as possible. I think, I said some of these things in full council the other day. We're in an impossible position once again. It seems to be getting worse. We really don't know what's going to happen over the coming weeks and months well, we don't know who's going to be in power. We don't know who's going to be our Prime Minister. We don't know who's going to be our Chancellor from one day to the next. But this really does impact on the council and the people who are paying for our services, and it's very, very difficult to see that we have to raise any fees at all in this year, but clearly we're doing our best to keep those low. I am concerned once again that we now have uncertainty over social care reform, but I hope some of the other things that we're doing as a council will help to mitigate some of the financial problems that people are likely to experience, those most vulnerable people are likely to experience as we come into what's going to be a very difficult winter. But I thank the officers for all the work that they've done to try and keep these fees as low as they can.
Any other comments? Councillor Van, Councillor Van, then Councillor Crofts.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I was going to make 2 comments. The first is, in terms of the planning fees, just to reflect on those from within the portfolio that I'm responsible for. Those are increases, but they remain competitive with our sort of neighbours. They're not quite directly comparable. I was going to say compatible, but comparable because of the way the levels are set within our scheme. But aside from the majority of planning fees, which are actually set by national government, and then building control fees, which have to be an average over 3 years, and there's some complicated formula that has to calculate exactly what we charge for that. Those are sort of needed, as it were, as Councillor Jackson was saying, because of the second comment that I wanted to make, which is that the government is considering, as has been widely trailed, further cuts to local government when we have borne the brunt of so many cuts so far. And these aren't cuts to local government, these are cuts to services that we provide. And actually you mentioned Mr. Watkins earlier, but also Councillor Headley, and I think the job that's been done to try and keep us balanced in Bedford Borough compared to other councils that have fallen over is excellent, but these are cuts and they are having an impact, as you noted as well in the corporate plan outturn. And I don't think the government have the slightest clue what goes on in local government. I think they just assume that we can take the hit. Even that building control figure that I mentioned earlier, that's the 3-year average, because they assume we can just soak up the fluctuations of that. But if they keep cutting us, we won't be able to soak up the fluctuations in that. That's probably the tiniest example I can think of. But every service we provide, from adult social care to libraries to children's centres and everything else, the government is determined to cut what local government does. And we are doing what we can, I think. And as Councillor Jackson says, we don't want to increase those fees outside of the ones that we're freezing, obviously, for residents. But in order to balance a budget and keep providing those key services, we have to. But it is an utter disgrace that the government are considering more cuts to local government. I mean, they hardly fund us at all anyway now, and it's a complete disgrace that they're flip-flopping over social care and they don't really know what they're doing as well. And we don't really know whether it'll be the same Prime Minister or the same Chancellor from 24 hours to the next. So it's a mess and we're having to deal with it. we're always having to deal with it.
Thank you very much, Councillor Crofts.
Thank you, Mayor. I do not disagree with anything that Councillor Jackson said. Just to put some context into it, we had many meetings before deciding the 12.5% fee for direct client payers. And looking back on last year's papers, we was having 2.5% inflation. That was only 12 months ago. So with inflation being announced this morning at 10.1%, that's how much it's changed, Mr. Mayor, in 12 months. And that increase in inflation affects our care homes that we run. We run our care homes not for profit. We are in a marketplace where care providers do make a profit out of their care homes, and it is a marketplace. And to come to the social care reforms, nationally, social care is in a mess. And with the reports this morning in the press that the government is going to delay again potential reform is really disappointing. And the effect it has, especially on our staff and our officers that are working really, really hard this year to get these reforms into place, because they have insisted that we are ready for April next year, but they haven't given us the money to get ready for April next year. They haven't given us the money to recruit the social workers we need, and we're having to make decisions as a council now without knowing whether we're going to get funding for these decisions. It is absolutely ridiculous. So in context, we wanted to cap the direct client payers for the residents of our borough. In our corporate plan, one of our key aims is supporting people, and we strongly feel that we support our people that live in the borough as one of our main aims as a council, and that's why we've capped the fees for direct payers. And there is a bigger increase for authorities that will be using our social care homes next year. And these are next year's fees, remember, so we also had to take into account inflation for next year, as well as this year.
Councillor Jackson.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I have to disagree with something that you said there, Councillor Van, there, because I think they know exactly what they're doing to local government. I think the government know exactly what they're doing. I think they're only too happy for local government to take the flak for poor decision making in central government. I think that is why we are bearing the brunt of all of these decisions, because then it's another thing that they don't have to deal with. But you know, our officers are doing the very best that they can to deliver services in spite of everything that they throw at us. I think it's going to be a really, really difficult winter. I think potential cuts as well to our NHS is going to make things even worse. But you know, we're all here to do the best we can for our communities, and I'm confident that we will continue to do so. But I think they know exactly what they're doing.
I don't think we're quite disagreeing.
Thank you very much for that. It is exceptionally difficult in budget, and I think this year's budget, when we come to it, and this is just the fees and charges always comes before the budget, and it just worries me. We're already working on the budget, and the pressures are huge. I think we just got to remind ourselves, and probably remind the public and government, that it's not local authorities they're cutting. It's services the most vulnerable. And Councillor Crofts told me today, and it's a figure I should know, and I now know it. We provide some kind of care to 2,600 people every single day. 2,600 people every single day. And if the government cuts money to councils, it's cutting money to those 2,600. We are all corporate parents sitting around this room to 268 children whose circumstances have not been great or are in need of massive support. If they cut money to councils, they are cutting money to 268 children who do not have the best start in life. And we can go on, but those are the most vulnerable people that we support. And we've tried to keep the costs in the fees and charges as low as we possibly can. But across the board, you're seeing stuff in the press about councils who are having huge numbers in terms of the money they haven't got. And I know that officers have been to national meetings, and across the board there is great concern. But before us this evening, we have the fees and charges we worked on and the recommendations are set out in 2, are we content to agree them? Thank you very much. Thank you all for attendance. Thank you, Andy, for all the work you've done over many years for this council. And I will now call the meeting to a close. Thank you very much.
Mr. Mayor.